The wind carried a sharp cry across the dry plains, a cry that echoed off the tall pines and rolled into the open valley like a warning from the wilderness itself. Travelers on the old wagon road paused and glanced toward the sound, but no one dared step off the trail. Folks in that part of the frontier had learned that when a woman screamed in those lonely woods, something dangerous was close by. The frontier had its own laws, its own shadows, and its own secrets that hid between the ridges. And on that late summer evening, a young woman's voice cut through the dusk with enough force to shake the quiet land. Her name was Leora, a ranch daughter with strong spirit and a heart shaped by hardship. She had been raised in a world of dust storms, cattle drives, and long rides into town for supplies. Her mother had passed years earlier, and her father kept her close, too close for comfort sometimes. He feared the wild world around them. He feared the raiders who sometimes slipped past the soldiers. He feared the storms and the mountain lions. And more than anything, he feared what men could do to a girl alone on the frontier. So he tried to protect her by locking her away from the world, never knowing that sheltering her would only make her more vulnerable once danger finally found her. That danger arrived when her wagon broke down on the North Trail. She had only ridden out to fetch herbs for her father's pain, thinking she would return before dusk. But the wheel snapped against a large stone, and before she could settle her racing breath, she heard the rustle of footsteps behind her. Panic rose in her chest. The forest around her was too still. Every crack of branches felt like a threat. She stepped back toward the wagon seat, clutching her basket close, trying to draw strength from some quiet place inside her. The frontier was no place for fear, yet fear was all she felt as the shadows thickened. Out from those shadows stepped a tall figure with bronzed skin, long dark hair tied back with rawhide, and the steady presence of someone who understood the land better than most men understood themselves. His name was Thunderhawk, a warrior of the Apache, known across the territories for his unmatched tracking skills and fearlessness when danger struck. He was neither reckless nor cruel, though the settlers whispered about him. They told stories of Apache warriors who moved like storms and struck without warning. But Thunderhawk lived with honor rooted deep in the old ways, the ways that valued courage, truth, and the protection of the innocent. When Leora saw him, the fear inside her surged like wildfire. She tried to run, but the forest floor snagged her skirts and she stumbled. Her voice escaped her in a single sharp scream that carried across the entire valley. She felt embarrassed for crying out, yet she could not control the fear that had grabbed her whole being. She had never been alone with any man except her father, and she had certainly never stood face to face with a warrior whose presence felt as powerful enough to silence the world. Thunderhawk stopped a few paces away from her, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. His deep voice broke the tension in the air with surprising calm. He told her he had been tracking a wounded wolf that had crossed the trail earlier, and her scream had made him think danger had found her. His tone was steady, but his sharp eyes scanned the forest as if expecting trouble. He sensed something else nearby, something Leora could not see yet. She breathed hard, trying to calm herself. Her mind raced with fear and old stories. Yet there was something about Thunderhawk that did not match the frightening tales she had heard. The way he stood, the way he watched the land around them, the way he spoke without raising his voice, it all hinted at a man who carried a heavy sense of responsibility. Still, she kept her distance. Fear was not something she could switch off. Not after a lifetime of warnings. Thunderhawk walked toward her broken wagon and inspected the shattered wheel. He told her the repair would take hours, and the sun had already dipped low. He warned her that the valley had been restless lately. Strangers drifted across the trails at night, and some were far more dangerous than wild animals. He looked at her with steady seriousness, telling her she needed to leave the area before darkness claimed the woods. But before she could respond, a deeper sound rolled through the trees, hoofbeats many of them. Heavy and fast, heading toward the trail from the eastern ridge. Leora's hands trembled as she tried to lift her basket again. She knew those sounds did not belong to ranchers or travelers. They belonged to men who rode with trouble at their heels and greed in their hearts. Thunderhawk's expression tensed. He whispered that these riders were not his people nor any tribe he recognized. They were outlaws who had been raiding lonely wagons for weeks. Leora felt her blood run cold. Thunderhawk moved closer, not touching her, but positioning himself between her and the sound of approaching danger. He told her she needed to trust him, just this once, or she would not survive the night. She hesitated, torn between fear of him and fear of what rode toward them. Something inside her, something instinctive and powerful, urged her to trust the man who stood like a living shield before her. She nodded, just barely. He placed one protective arm around her waist to steady her as he guided her away from the wagon. The moment his hand touched her side, she stiffened. Her breath caught in her throat, and she let out a startled cry, louder than she intended. Thunderhawk looked at her with confusion, sensing something in her reaction that he had not expected. He realized then that she carried an innocence far rarer on the frontier than gold. She had been protected her entire life, untouched by the roughness of the world. And her sharp cry made that truth clear to him. He saw the fear in her eyes. Fear not of him, but of everything she did not understand. And in that moment, he understood she was still pure in ways the harsh frontier rarely allowed. She was unprepared for the danger closing in, and the outlaw riders would see her vulnerability as something to exploit. Thunderhawk knew he had only seconds to decide what to do. The hoofbeats grew louder. The ground began to tremble. Leora clung to her basket, trying not to show how much she was shaking. Thunderhawk tightened his jaw as he studied the tree line. He whispered that the outlaws had spotted the broken wagon because they had slowed down. He could hear the shift in their riding pattern. They were close enough now that he could sense their intent. It was not good. He told Leora to stay behind him no matter what happened next. She watched his grip tighten around the handle of the long blade at his hip. Not out of desire for violence, but out of absolute readiness to defend. Thunderhawk's voice dropped to a low tone that carried an old promise. A warrior's vow to protect the innocent even if it meant facing overwhelming danger. The riders burst from the pines. But before the outlaws could fully surround the broken wagon, Thunderhawk stepped forward like a wall between them and the terrified young woman. Leora held her breath, her heart pounding so hard she felt it would break through her ribs. The lead rider slowed, glaring at the warrior blocking his path. The forest fell silent again as both sides waited for the first bold move. And in that breathless moment, Leora realized that whatever happened next would decide both their fates. The introduction ends here. Holding the tension for the next part, the forest held its breath as Thunderhawk faced the outlaw riders head-on. His body angled just enough to shield Leora from their view. She could barely see past his broad shoulders, but she could feel the danger pressing in around them. The outlaws rode in a loose half-circle, their horses snorting and pawing at the ground as if uneasy about the confrontation. The lead rider, a man with a scar running from his temple to his jaw, leaned forward in his saddle with a smirk that never reached his cold eyes. Thunderhawk said nothing at first. His silence alone felt heavier than the sound of the horses, heavier than the tension filling the clearing. Leora gripped her basket so hard her knuckles turned pale. She had never seen a man stand in front of an armed group without flinching. It told her something important about Thunderhawk, something she didn't yet understand, but felt deep inside. He wasn't reckless. He was prepared. The lead outlaw tilted his head and asked what a warrior like Thunderhawk was doing with a broken wagon and a frightened girl. His voice was rough, but there was a hint of calculation hidden behind his tone. He wanted to know if Thunderhawk was alone, and if the girl was unprotected. His eyes scanned the shadows as if looking for soldiers or other tribesmen. When he found none, his grin grew wider. Thunderhawk didn't answer his question. Instead, he warned the riders to turn back. He said the land beyond the ridge was unstable, that more trouble waited there. It was a subtle way of telling them to leave without directly provoking them. But the outlaw only chuckled and said he didn't ride all the way into the valley for warnings. He wanted supplies, maybe more. His gaze shifted toward the wagon, and toward the little bit of skirt he could see behind Thunderhawk's arm. Leora felt a shiver crawl down her spine. She knew what those kinds of men wanted. She had heard whispers from travelers in town, stories that made her father tighten his grip on his rifle. Her breathing quickened, and Thunderhawk must have felt it, because he shifted his stance slightly, creating a solid barrier between her and the outlaw's stare. Before the riders could advance, Thunderhawk spoke again, his time with a low firmness that came from years of command and instinct. He told them the girl was under his protection. Those words struck Leora like a spark. No one had ever said such a thing about her except her father, yet this warrior spoke it with a certainty that left no room for challenge. But the outlaws took it as a challenge anyway. The lead rider laughed again, louder this time. He said one warrior couldn't protect anyone from a whole group of armed men. He began to raise his rifle, not to fire, but to intimidate. Thunderhawk didn't move, but Leora could feel the shift in his energy. He was measuring the riders, their positions, their weaknesses. He was calculating the land around them, the distance to the trees, the slope of the hill. She had seen her father study cattle with that same level of attention, but this was something far sharper. This was survival. Before any weapon was drawn, another rider called out from the edge of the group. He asked the leader if wasting time here was worth it. The trail ahead held loot from a merchant's caravan that had passed earlier that day. They didn't need trouble with a warrior who looked ready to fight. The leader paused, annoyed but thoughtful. He eyed Thunderhawk once more, then clicked his tongue and signaled his men away. As they turned their horses, he warned that the valley belonged to no one and that they might cross paths again. Leora didn't release her. Tight breath until the riders were completely gone. Her knees felt weak, and her heartbeat thumped through her chest with a strength she had never known. Thunderhawk waited until the sound of hooves faded before relaxing his stance. He turned slightly and asked if she was hurt. She shook her head, but her voice failed her. Thunderhawk studied her trembling hands and told her she needed to move. The outlaws had left, but the danger wasn't over. They might return, or others might hear the gunshots if a fight broke out. He led her toward a narrow trail that curved behind the rocks, away from the main road. Leora followed closely, still shaken, but trusting him now in a way that surprised even herself. As they walked, she tried to steady her thoughts. She wanted to understand the warrior who had stood for her without hesitation. A stranger she had been afraid of just moments before. Thunderhawk stopped near a hidden clearing, small but sheltered. He told her they would wait there only long enough for the moon to rise, then move towards safer ground. The forest around them hummed with evening sounds. Crickets sang, leaves shifted in the breeze, and somewhere an owl echoed across the ridge. Leora sat beside a fallen log, her hands still shaky from the fear she had felt earlier. Thunderhawk sat a few steps away, sharpening the edge of his blade with calm, steady motions. The faint scraping sound filled the silence between them. Leora watched him carefully. He had protected her without asking for anything. He had faced a whole group of riders without fear. She wondered what kind of life shaped a man into someone so strong. She asked him how he knew the outlaws would not attack. He said he didn't know for sure. He had only read their behavior and gambled that they wanted easy prey, not a standoff. His voice was low but confident. He explained that the frontier punished foolishness, and the leader of that group was foolish, but not enough to risk losing his men for a broken wagon. Leora looked down at her hands. She felt small compared to the vast world Thunderhawk seemed to understand so deeply. She had lived most of her life behind the ranch fence, learning how to cook, clean, and tend to small chores. She had dreamed of freedom, but had never known what freedom actually demanded. She felt unprepared, almost helpless, yet Thunderhawk didn't treat her like someone weak. He treated her like someone worth protecting. He asked her why she was on the trail alone. She explained about her father's pain, the herbs she needed, the wagon breaking, and how she had panicked when the shadows moved. Thunderhawk listened quietly, his attention focused entirely on her words. When she finished, he nodded slowly, saying fear was not a shameful thing. Fear kept people alive. What mattered was how they moved through it. Leora absorbed his words as if they were water in a drought. She had lived her life being told what to fear, but never how to face it. Thunderhawk seemed to carry both fear and courage in balance, and she wondered how he had learned it. He finally told her a little of his own story. His people had lived in the valley long before the ranchers in the towns. They respected the land, the animals, the storms, and the seasons. But the world had changed around them. Soldiers moved through the territory, settlers built fences, and outlaws roamed the borders. Thunderhawk's duty was to protect his people from whatever dangers reached their lands. Leora listened intently, drawn in by the mix of strength and sadness in his tone. She asked if he always traveled alone. He said not always, but often. The path of a warrior meant moving where danger moved. Sometimes that path led him far from his own people. The moon finally rose, casting silver light across the clearing. Thunderhawk stood and told her it was time to travel again. The outlaws could return, and staying in one place too long would be a mistake. Leora rose as well, still nervous but no longer frozen with fear. She followed him along a narrow trail that wound between tall cedars and thick brush. As they moved deeper into the forest, she began to notice how quiet Thunderhawk walked. He stepped lightly, placing his feet with careful precision. Even the dry leaves underfoot barely made a sound. She did her best to imitate his movements, though she stepped on twigs several times and winced at every crack. Thunderhawk didn't reprimand her. He only looked back with a calm expression and guided her around the noisiest patches. After a long stretch of walking, they reached a small ridge overlooking another valley. From there, they could see faint campfires far in the distance. Thunderhawk studied them with narrowed eyes. He said the outlaws had settled for the night. They wouldn't find them here yet, but the two of them needed to stay alert. Leora felt the weight of his words. She was far from home, deeper into the wilderness than she had ever gone. The frontier felt larger and more dangerous than she ever imagined. Yet standing beside Thunderhawk, she also felt a strange sense of safety, as if danger recognized him and hesitated. She wanted to ask what would happen next. She wanted to know how far they had to go, where he planned to take her, and whether she would ever see home again. But before she could speak, Thunderhawk raised his hand to silence her. He had heard something, a distant rustle, a shift in the brush far below. He leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on the darkness, and whispered that someone was following them. Not the outlaws. Someone else entirely. Leora's breath hitched in her throat as the night around them grew colder. The journey had only begun, and another threat was already drawing near. Hidden in the shadows of the frontier, Leora stood frozen at the ridge, following Thunderhawk's gaze into the darkness below. The night felt thick, as if the shadows themselves were listening. She could not see who moved under the trees, but she felt it, the way a ranch horse felt a storm before clouds appeared. Thunderhawk shifted slightly in front of her, just as he had when the outlaws arrived, and that simple motion told her the danger was real. He whispered that whoever followed them stepped with more care than the riders. This was someone trained, someone who understood the land. That alone made the threat more troubling. He motioned for her to crouch behind a jagged rock while he slid along the ridge to gain a better view. Leora pressed her back against the cool stone, clutching her skirts close so they would not snag. Her mind raced. The frontier had turned from open space into a maze filled with enemies she could not see. Outlaws were bad enough. Now another hunter moved in the dark, drawn toward them. She wondered if this new threat was after her, Thunderhawk, or both. The uncertainty gnawed at her. Down below, a lone figure moved between the trees, cloaked in the dim silver of moonlight. Thunderhawk recognized the posture long before he could see the face. The man walked with the patience of a tracker, stopping often to touch the ground, to feel where footsteps had pressed into the earth. Thunderhawk's jaw tightened. He knew that kind of walk. Years earlier, he had met a frontier scout named Flint Rowe, a man who worked for whoever paid in gold. Flint had trained with tribes and soldiers, learning to move in silence and track without rest. They had once fought side by side against a band of raiders. Later, Flint had turned against Thunderhawk's people, leading soldiers into sacred canyons. That betrayal had never been forgiven. Thunderhawk watched the figure pause near some broken brush, the very place where Leora had stumbled. The man crouched, touched the ground, then lifted his head like a wolf catching scent. Flint Rowe. There was no doubt now. Thunderhawk stepped back from the ridge and returned to Leora with quiet urgency. He told her a skilled tracker followed them and that they had to move again before the man could fix their exact position. Leora wanted to ask who it was, but the tightness around Thunderhawk's eyes stopped her. Some names did not need to be spoken aloud to carry weight. While they slipped back into the cover of the trees, miles away, another story unfolded. On the wide plain near the ranch, a lantern burned in a small farmhouse window. Leora's father, a broad-shouldered man named Iron Cole, paced the floorboards. The old medicine chest stood open, the place where the herbs should have been. Her absence had gone from strange to alarming as evening turned to night. Iron Cole had seen many dangers on the old American frontier. He had fought rustlers, survived harsh winters, and buried his wife under the lone cottonwood behind the house. He feared nothing for himself. But his daughter was another matter. Iron Cole saddled his horse and rode into the dark, his worry sharpening with every mile. At the edge of town, he found the small sheriff's office glowing like a tired star. Sheriff Stone Archer, tall and weathered, listened as Iron described Leora's route and the broken trail wagon they had once used in that direction. Stone Archer knew that valley. He knew about the outlaw riders who had been haunting it and the rumors of Apache warriors watching from the cliffs. He also knew what could happen to a young woman alone. The sheriff promised to ride out at first light with a small posse. Iron Cole wanted to leave that moment. But Stone Archer reminded him that stumbling through dark ravines could get them both killed before they even reached her. Iron returned home, but he did not sleep. He sat at the wooden table, hands clenched, replaying every warning he had ever given Leora. He had always tried to protect her purity, her innocence, believing that keeping her close would keep her safe. Now he feared his caution had left her unprepared for the rough hands of the world. Back in the forest, Leora and Thunderhawk moved through twisting paths only he seemed able to see. The moon slid between clouds, painting the land in shifting silver. Leora whispered a question, asking why someone would follow them in silence, instead of charging in like the outlaws. Thunderhawk answered that a tracker like Flint Rowe never attacked without first knowing everything. Flint would want to see who Thunderhawk traveled with, whether he was alone, and how vulnerable they were. The thought sent a chill through Leora. She realized that in the eyes of the world, she might look like a prize. A ranch daughter, untouched. A young woman still a virgin, in a land that easily crushed softness. Thunderhawk saw the worry in her eyes. He told her that her innocence was not a weakness, but a responsibility. It meant she had something worth protecting, something pure in a harsh world. He did not speak of it with shame, but with a kind of reverence that made Leora's heart feel both heavier and stronger. No one had ever explained it like that. Her father had guarded her, the town preacher had preached about her virtue, but neither had spoken of it as a strength. Thunderhawk's view gave her a new sense of herself, even as danger closed in. As they walked, a quieter conflict brewed between them. Leora had been raised to distrust Apache warriors. Her father had never allowed her near them, and the stories in town often painted them as merciless. Yet everything she had seen from Thunderhawk was the opposite. He shielded her, spoke calmly, and treated her with more respect than some men in town ever showed their own wives. At the same time, Thunderhawk had grown up watching settlers break promises and soldiers push his people from their lands. He had every reason to keep his distance from ranchers and their families. They traveled in uneasy companionship, both learning to challenge the stories they had been told. Leora asked about his childhood, about the elders who had taught him to track and hunt. Thunderhawk spoke of his mother, Dawn River, who had taught him to read the sky and listen to the wind. He told her about long rides across open land before fences crisscrossed the valley. Leora listened with widening eyes, trying to picture a time before wagons and towns. It sounded almost like another world, yet it was the same land she had grown up on, in return. Thunderhawk asked about her life on the ranch. Leora described early mornings milking cows, feeding chickens, and riding the same perimeter fence day after day. She spoke of the town's small church, the dusty general store, and the way people watched one another, quick to judge any girl who stepped outside the narrow path set for her. She told him how her father planned to marry her to a banker named Cedar Royce, a man with wealth but no warmth. Thunderhawk listened without interrupting. The thought of Leora bound to a man who saw her as property unsettled him. In his people's way, a woman might be protected, but she still carried her own spirit. No one owned that. Their conversation deepened the main conflict that now circled them. Leora was caught between two worlds. One wanted to keep her safe by caging her. The other demanded she face danger to grow. Thunderhawk, too, was torn. He could not leave her, yet every step he took with her at his side pulled him closer to trouble with settlers. Soldiers, and now Flint Row. Protecting her meant risking his own people. Because any misunderstanding could ignite violence between tribe and town. As dawn stole the color from the sky, Thunderhawk guided Leora to a hidden hollow near a creek. The water flowed clear and cold, offering them a brief chance to rest. Leora knelt to drink, watching her own reflection tremble in the current. She hardly recognized the girl staring back. That girl looked older, more aware. The scream she had let out on the trail still echoed in her mind. It marked the moment her sheltered life had shattered. Thunderhawk scanned the area, setting small signals only an experienced Apache warrior would notice. A broken twig here, a stone tilted there. If his people passed through, they would read his signs and know he traveled with a settler girl under protection, not as a captive. He hoped the message would spread quietly. The last thing he wanted was a clash caused by misunderstanding. Leora watched him work with quiet fascination. She began to sense how many layers of meaning hid inside the frontier, layers she had never been taught. The land spoke to Thunderhawk in ways invisible to her. Every footprint, every bent blade of grass, every shift in the wind carried information. It made her feel small, but also strangely hopeful. Maybe she could learn. Maybe she did not have to remain helpless. Their brief rest ended when Thunderhawk stiffened again. He found a fresh print near the creek, deeper than his, wider than hers. Flint Row had followed their trail through the night and was closing the distance. Thunderhawk knew the tracker would not give up. There had to be a reason Flint wanted him found. Perhaps soldiers had placed a price on his head. Perhaps the outlaws had struck a deal with the scout, promising a share if he led them to easy victims. The unknown motive twisted the situation tighter. Thunderhawk had planned for outlaws who craved money or cruel sport. He could not easily plan for a man whose reasons he did not fully understand. Leora sensed his unease and asked if the tracker would hurt them. Thunderhawk answered honestly. A man like Flint Row might choose whatever path paid more. And right now, both the outlaws and the frightened ranchers might offer coin to anyone who brought them news of an Apache warrior. Traveling with a young virgin from the valley, Leora's throat tightened at the thought of how people might talk. They would not understand the truth. They would see only scandal and danger, not the courage that kept her alive. Thunderhawk saw the hurt in her eyes and told her she could not control the stories others told. She could only live in a way that kept her spirit honest. His words comforted her a little, but the larger storm still gathered. By midday, Flint Row finally caught a glimpse of them through a split in the trees. He crouched behind a fallen log, watching Thunderhawk walk slightly ahead, while Leora followed. A slow smile spread across his face. He had not expected to find the proud Apache warrior playing guardian to a ranch girl. To Flint, this meant opportunity. He could sell the story of a kidnapping to the ranchers, blame Thunderhawk for whatever fear gripped the valley, and then turn around and offer Thunderhawk's location to the outlaws or the army. He could profit from both sides while they tore each other apart. He retreated silently, planning his next move. The main conflict had grown into something larger than a simple rescue. It was now a web of fear, greed, and misunderstanding stretching from the ranch to the tribal lands. Leora and Thunderhawk walked on, unaware that a man with shifting loyalties now held their fates in his hands, and that her father and the sheriff were preparing to ride into the very valley where all these forces were about to collide. The morning sun rose slow and pale over the valley, casting long, thin stripes of gold between the tall pines. Thunderhawk and Leora kept moving, their steps quiet, but their minds filled with tension that only tightened with every mile. The forest around them felt restless. Birds lifted suddenly from branches. Leaves whispered even when the wind stilled. It was as if the land itself sensed danger weaving through its shadows. Leora stayed close behind Thunderhawk, trying to match his careful steps. But her heart beat louder than her footsteps. Giving her away to every thought of fear, Thunderhawk stopped often to study the ground. Read the prints and listen for movement. Sometimes he crouched for a long moment, pressing his palm against the soil as if the earth itself spoke to him. Leora watched him with a mix of awe and worry. He was calm, but that calmness was sharpened like the edge of his blade. She knew he sensed danger closer than before. The thought made the air feel thinner. When they reached a narrow canyon split by a shallow creek, Thunderhawk motioned for Leora to rest under a leaning boulder. She sat down slowly, her legs aching from the long journey. She tried to drink from the creek, but her hands trembled so much the water slipped through her fingers. Thunderhawk knelt beside her, offering her a small leather pouch filled with water. Leora took it with a quiet thank you, her voice barely above a whisper. Thunderhawk scanned the canyon walls while she drank. He said the tracker following them was drawing nearer. Flint Row would not give up now that he had picked up a clear trail. Leora asked again why the man hunted them. Thunderhawk stared at the cliff face before answering. Flint rode between loyalties. He searched for profit, not truth. If he captured Thunderhawk, he could sell the information to the soldiers. If he brought Leora home while claiming Thunderhawk had wronged her, he might be paid by her father or celebrated as a hero. Flint would twist any path that led him to gold. Hearing those words stirred a sick feeling inside. Leora, she pictured her father's face, full of panic and grief, believing lies about her. She imagined townsfolk whispering cruel stories, blaming Thunderhawk for things he never did. She tugged at her sleeves, feeling small under the weight of how fragile the truth could be. Thunderhawk noticed her distress and told her not to drown herself in fear of rumors. The world would say what it wished, but courage was found in facing what was real, not imagined. Before Leora could answer, Thunderhawk stiffened. A faint crunch echoed along the canyon edge. Flint Row stepped into view above them, holding a rifle as casually as a rancher held a rope. He called out Thunderhawk's name with a grin that carried no warmth. Leora gasped and moved behind Thunderhawk instinctively. Flint Row laughed, saying he already knew she was there. He praised Thunderhawk for keeping watch over her, pretending admiration while hiding something darker behind his eyes. Thunder. Hawk positioned himself between Flint and Leora. Flint tilted his rifle in a loose gesture, saying he had no reason to shoot unless forced. He claimed he only wanted to speak, to make an arrangement. Leora could hear the false trust dripping from his tone. Thunderhawk answered that Flint Row's arrangements were traps. Flint admitted it with a smirk, saying traps were needed in a world that rewarded clever men. He proposed a deal. He would take Leora safely back to her father and claim Thunderhawk had kidnapped her. The settlers would believe the story, and in return Flint would disappear before the tribes retaliated. Leora's heart hammered. She tried to stand, wanting to shout that no such thing had happened. But Thunderhawk lifted one hand, gently motioning for her to stay quiet. His silence spoke louder than Flint's bargain. Flint then offered another deal. If Thunderhawk refused to surrender her, Flint would call the outlaws. He had seen their campfires. He could lead them straight to the canyon, trapping both Thunderhawk and Leora. He said the outlaws would not show mercy. In fact, they were already curious about the young virgin traveling with an Apache warrior. Flint let the words hang in the air, twisting them to provoke fear. Thunderhawk's breath deepened. The danger Flint posed was growing too large. Leora felt Thunderhawk shift, preparing to move. The tension stretched so tight it felt like the whole canyon would snap under it. But before Flint could press the threat further, a distant sound carried across the plains. Horses. Several of them. Leora recognized the rhythm, the sharp, determined pace. Her father and the sheriff were riding fast toward the valley. Flint heard the horses too. His grin returned, wider this time. He told Thunderhawk that now he didn't even need the outlaws. The settlers would soon arrive and find Thunderhawk with Leora. Flint only had to point and lie. The rest would unfold on its own. Thunderhawk realized Flint planned to twist this into a story where he was the villain. Flint lowered himself behind a rock, preparing to slip away before the riders appeared. Thunderhawk's jaw hardened. He knew Flint would poison the truth if he reached Iron Coal first. He grabbed Leora's hand, pulling her toward a narrow path leading up the canyon wall. She followed quickly, trusting his urgency. Every step up the uneven stone felt like a battle. Loose rocks slid under her boots. Her breath grew shallow. The horses grew louder. Flint's voice echoed somewhere below, laughing as he ran toward the incoming riders. Thunderhawk pushed them higher until they reached a ridge hidden by thick brush. He crouched low, pulling Leora beside him. From there, they could see the edge of the valley where her father and Sheriff Stone Archer rode hard, their lanterns swaying from the saddles. Leora's eyes filled with tears as she watched her father search the horizon with desperation. She wanted to run to him, to ease the fear she knew was stealing his sleep. But Thunderhawk placed a hand on her shoulder and reminded her that riding into sight right now would end in disaster. Flint Row would reach them within minutes, spinning stories that would turn father against daughter and lawman against warrior. She turned back to Thunderhawk, torn between fear and longing. Each side of the conflict pulled at her until she felt she might burst. Thunderhawk's expression showed the weight of his own conflict. Protecting Leora made him the enemy of an entire valley, but letting her go would expose her to the lies Flint planned to spread. For a long moment, they held each other's gaze, silently acknowledging the storm closing in on both of them. The sheriff's group reached the canyon floor. Flint Row burst from the trees, waving his arms. Ironcole shouted something Leora could not hear, but she saw the anger and fear rising in his posture. Flint pointed up the canyon as he spoke, painting a picture of danger. Sheriff Stone Archer's hand slid to his rifle. The posse tightened formation. Leora's chest tightened so much she could barely breathe. Thunderhawk whispered that they needed to move again. Staying meant being surrounded. He guided Leora down a different path on the other side of the ridge, away from the searching riders. As they hurried through a shadowed slope thick with cedar roots, Leora felt more torn than ever before. The posse was close enough now that she could hear her father shouting her name. His voice cracked with worry. She slowed for a moment, unable to stop the tears burning her eyes. Thunderhawk gently grabbed her elbow, steadying her. He understood the pain but reminded her that stepping into view would trap both of them in Flint Row's lie. They pushed deeper into a narrow channel, where the rocks formed sharp walls. Leora stumbled over a root, and Thunderhawk caught her before she fell. Their closeness carried a different kind of tension now, something emotional, protective, and confusing for both sides. But neither had time to understand it. The sound of more horses drifted from behind them. The sheriff's men were splitting into groups, trying to cut off possible escape routes. The stakes grew heavier as the afternoon sun dipped behind heavy clouds. The air thickened with the sense of a coming clash. Thunderhawk led Leora toward an abandoned trapper's cabin hidden in the folds of the land. Smoke scars still stained the chimney stones. It offered temporary shelter, nothing more, but they needed a place to catch their breath. Leora sank onto an old wooden bench inside, trying to steady her shaking hands. Thunderhawk stood at the window, watching the ridge with sharp, focused eyes as the wind carried distant shouts through the valley. Leora whispered that her father would never believe she was taken by force. Thunderhawk asked her if her father would listen before acting. Leora had no answer. Her father was a good man, but rage could blind anyone, especially when fear for a child burned inside. Thunderhawk stepped away from the window and knelt beside her. He told her they were reaching the heart of the conflict. Flint Row would turn the sheriff's men against them. The outlaws might still be near. The land itself was tightening like a trap. Every road out of the valley held danger, but he promised he would not abandon her. His voice carried a strength that struck Leora deeply. A promise made not out of duty, but something growing stronger inside him. Before she could speak, the loud crack of a rifle echoed through the canyon, followed by the frantic whinny of a horse. Shouting erupted as the sheriff's men rushed toward the sound. Thunderhawk jumped to his feet. Someone had fired the first shot, and once the first shot rang out in the frontier, were always followed. Leora stood, heart pounding. The cabin walls felt too thin, the air too heavy. Thunderhawk took her hand again, his grip firm and grounding. He whispered that everything was moving toward a storm, and they had little time left before all sides collided. Then, through the window, Leora saw Flint Row emerging onto the ridge above the sheriff's group. He raised his rifle, shouting something that sent the posse scrambling. And right then, she realized Flint no longer wanted to frame Thunderhawk. Now, he wanted something far more dangerous. He wanted to provoke a war. Thunderhawk saw it too. And the valley, charged with fear and lies, with seconds from exploding into chaos, neither of them could stop. The story now pushes toward the climax, but the outcome remains unresolved. With danger closing in on all sides, the ridge shook with chaos as Flint Rowe lifted his rifle and shouted words meant to spark fear. From the trapper's cabin, Leora watched her father and the sheriff struggled to make sense of the noise. Men pointed in different directions, horses fought their reins, and the whole valley seemed ready to burst. Thunderhawk understood the danger faster than she could process it. Flint was trying to twist the moment into a spark that would set Apache and settlers against each other. One wrong move from any side would end in bloodshed. And Leora felt her stomach twist with dread. Thunderhawk tightened his hold on her hand and said they had no choice now. If they hid any longer, Flint's story would spread like wildfire. The only way to stop the lie was to step straight into the truth, even if it meant facing angry rifles. Leora hesitated, fear rising inside her. But she saw in Thunderhawk's eyes the same strength that had protected her from the very start. Not force, not pride. Just the steady courage of a man who chose what was right even when it was dangerous. She nodded. She would walk into the valley beside him. They left the cabin and moved through the trees toward the shouting. The closer they came, the louder the clamor grew. Leora could hear her father yelling orders, hear the sheriff demanding calm, and hear Flint loudly insisting that Thunderhawk had taken Leora by force. The lie stung her like a blade. She squeezed Thunderhawk's hand, readying herself. When they stepped out from the brush into the open light, everything stopped. Horses spun in confusion. Men stared in shock. Iron Coal froze. The breath knocked out of him as he saw his daughter walking beside the Apache warrior, unharmed, steady, and eyes strong with purpose. Thunderhawk lifted his open hand slowly to show he carried no threat. Leora stepped forward first. She called out to her father, voice firm despite her trembling heart. She told him she had not been taken. Thunderhawk had saved her from outlaws on the trail. It protected her through the night, and had never hurt or frightened her. Her father listened, stunned, his face wrestling between relief and disbelief. Flint tried to interrupt, shouting that she was lying out of fear. But Leora turned to him with unexpected fire in her voice. She accused Flint of twisting the truth, of planning to sell her story to the highest bidder, and of hunting them with greed in his heart. Sheriff Stone Archer watched closely. The sheriff was a man who knew how to read faces, and Flint's face gave him all the answers he needed. Thunderhawk stepped in next, explaining with calm detail how they had encountered the outlaws, how Flint had shadowed them, and how he planned to provoke a clash between settlers and Apache. The sheriff's expression darkened as he pieced the truth together. Iron Coal dismounted and ran to his daughter. Leora threw her arms around him, tears slipping out as her father held her tight. She felt his relief shake through his large frame. He looked Thunderhawk over with suspicion at first, but when he heard how the warrior had shielded her from danger, something softened in his stare. He raised a hand and thanked Thunderhawk, though the words came slowly. The frontier was a hard teacher, but gratitude broke through old walls. Flint Rowe, realizing the story had slipped from his grasp, reached for his rifle. Sheriff Stone Archer was quicker. He fired a warning shot into the dirt at Flint's feet and ordered him to drop the gun. Flint hesitated only a moment before seeing that every rifle now pointed at him. He grit his teeth and surrendered, his plot collapsing around him. The sheriff arrested him on the spot, promising the town would decide what to do with him. Flint tried to blame Thunderhawk again, but by now his words had the strength of a broken rope. With danger finally restrained, the valley quieted. The horses calmed. The air no longer shook from shouts, but carried a weary sigh of relief. Leora felt her knees weaken as the weight of the journey settled. Thunderhawk stood nearby, silent and steady, watching her with the concern of someone who had carried her safety in his hands for miles. Her father approached him and asked one question, his voice low but honest. He asked if Thunderhawk had truly protected her as she claimed. Thunderhawk answered with a simple yes. He said he protected her because she deserved protection, not because she was a settler girl, but because she was a human spirit who had walked into danger without understanding it. Iron Coal studied the warrior's face and found no lie. He extended his hand. Thunderhawk accepted the gesture. The handshake held no dramatic flair, but it carried the weight of two worlds finding rare understanding. The sheriff ordered his men to escort Flint back toward town. Iron Coal told Leora to ride home with him. She hesitated, glancing back at Thunderhawk. He gave her a small nod, telling her she would be safe now. But she stepped closer before leaving, and thanked him in a voice that carried more meaning than words could hold. Thunderhawk did not bow or speak dramatically. He only said she had shown bravery greater than she knew, as Iron Coal and Leora rode toward the ranch. The sun warmed the land, melting the cold fear that had haunted her since the wagon wheel broke. Her father listened as she spoke softly about the journey, about the danger, about Thunderhawk's guidance. With each detail, Iron Coal's view of the warrior shifted. He felt gratitude he had not expected and respect he never thought he would give. Back in town, Sheriff Stone Archer made sure rumors spread with truth this time. People learned that Thunderhawk had protected a ranch daughter from outlaws and exposed Flint Row's lies. The valley, often divided by fear, felt a moment of unity, a rare breath of calm across the frontier. Thunderhawk returned to his people, carrying with him a quiet reflection on how distrust could be broken by courage. When someone dared to stand in the middle of danger with honesty, he thought often of Leora, not with longing or regret, but with pride for the way she faced the unknown. She had stepped beyond the fences of her life and survived a trial that changed her spirit. She was no longer the sheltered girl afraid of shadows. She had become a young woman who could stand firm, even when the world trembled. Days later, Leora walked the ranch fields at dusk, staring at the horizon where the mountains cut the sky. She replayed everything that had happened: the danger, the running, the fear, and the strength she discovered inside herself. She knew the valley would always remember the story of the Apache warrior and the ranch daughter, how truth triumphed over lies, and how courage built a bridge in a land used to walls. Her father joined her and rested a hand on her shoulder. He told her he was proud she had survived, proud she had spoken with strength, proud she had shown judgment clearer than many grown men. She smiled softly and leaned her head against him. She felt the healing in her home, in herself, and in the land around them. Thunderhawk visited once more before the winter winds arrived. He rode to the edge of the ranch and waited until Leora appeared. They spoke quietly near the fence line, each grateful to see the other safe. Thunderhawk told her the valley felt quieter now, at least for a time. She told him she would never forget the journey that had changed her life. He placed a small carved feather in her hand, a symbol of protection and respect. She held it with care, understanding its meaning without needing any explanation. They parted with a sense of peace, knowing their paths might cross again or might remain separate, but the bond formed between them would not fade. It would live in the stories of the old American frontier, in the whispers carried by the wind, and in the strength they had given each other in the darkest moments, as the sun set behind the distant ridge. Leora walked back toward her home with a calm heart. Thunderhawk rode away toward the mountains, carrying the memory of a young woman who faced danger and found her voice. The frontier settled into evening light, holding the echoes of courage, truth, and the fragile beauty of understanding between two different worlds. And so the story closed with hope, with healing, and with a quiet, powerful reminder that even in harsh lands, humanity could shine strong.